Some people can go through the hardest moments of their lives and still say nothing. They'll sit with their stress, their sadness, their confusion. Not because they want to, but because asking for help feels almost impossible. Even when they're overwhelmed, even when they're struggling, they'll tell themselves, "I'll figure it out." But the real question is, why? Why do some people find it so hard to simply say, "Can you help me?" The answer often begins much earlier than we realize. Imagine a child who falls and scrapes their knee. They run to a parent, tears in their eyes, but instead of comfort, they hear, "Stop crying. You're fine. Don't be dramatic." So the child wipes their tears and learns something very important in that moment. Not consciously, but deeply. They learn that their pain is inconvenient. The next time they're hurt, they hesitate. The next time they're confused, they stay quiet. The next time they need help, they keep it to themselves. Years pass. The child grows up, but the lesson stays. Now imagine that same person as an adult. They're overwhelmed with work. They're emotionally exhausted. They're struggling with something heavy. Friends are around them, people who would probably help, but something inside stops them. A voice whispers, "Don't bother them." Another voice adds, "You should handle this yourself." And the strongest one says, "If you ask for help, you'll look weak." So they smile. They say they're fine, and they carry everything alone. This isn't stubbornness, it's conditioning. Many people who struggle to ask for help learned very early that their needs didn't matter. Or worse, that having needs made them a problem. Maybe they grew up in a home where emotions were ignored, or where everyone was too busy surviving to notice. Sometimes the child who asked for help was labeled dramatic. Sometimes they were told to grow up. Sometimes they were simply overlooked. And something quiet happens in children who experience this. They adapt. They stop expecting support. They become independent much earlier than they should. But this kind of independence isn't freedom. It's protection. You might notice this pattern in adults who seem incredibly strong. They handle everything alone. They solve everyone else's problems. They rarely complain. People often admire them. "You're so independent. You're so strong." But what others don't see is the weight they carry. Because strength can become a mask, and independence can become a prison. Here's something interesting. People who struggle to ask for help are often the first ones to help others. They'll stay up all night listening to a friend. They'll drop everything to support someone. They'll give advice, time, and energy freely. But when the roles reverse, they freeze. Because deep down they believe something they rarely say out loud. My problems shouldn't bother anyone. This belief doesn't come from logic. It comes from experience. Maybe when they were younger, they tried to express their struggles, and someone dismissed them. Maybe they were told others had it worse. Maybe they were made to feel selfish for needing attention. So they adapted. They became the low-maintenance person, the one who never asks for much, the one who handles things quietly. And at first, this seems like maturity. But over time, it turns into emotional isolation. There's also another hidden fear: rejection. When you rarely ask for help, asking becomes a risk. Because if you finally open up and someone brushes you off, it confirms your deepest fear. That's why I should have kept it to myself. So instead, many people avoid the risk entirely. They convince themselves they don't need help, even when they do. Pause for a moment and think about this. When someone else struggles, do you see them as weak or human? Most people would say human. But when it comes to themselves, they hold a completely different standard. They expect themselves to carry everything perfectly, without breaking, without asking, without leaning on anyone. But no one is built that way. Not really. Humans were never meant to survive alone. Connection is part of how we heal. Support is part of how we grow. But if someone grew up learning that support wasn't reliable, they stop reaching for it, even when it finally exists. And this creates a strange paradox. Someone might be surrounded by people who care about them, friends who would listen, partners who would support them, but their mind still operates by an old rule: handle it alone. Not because they want to, but because it feels safer, familiar, predictable. The truth is, learning to ask for help later in life can feel uncomfortable, almost unnatural. It can feel like exposing something fragile, like revealing a side of yourself that was hidden for years. But something important happens when people slowly start doing it. They discover something unexpected. Most people don't see them as weak. They see them as real. And often, they feel closer to them. Because vulnerability creates connection, not distance. If you've always been the person who handles everything alone, it might feel strange to admit this. But you were never meant to carry everything by yourself. And needing support doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you're human. The real strength isn't pretending you don't need help. It's allowing yourself to be supported, even when it feels unfamiliar, even when it feels uncomfortable. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a person can say isn't, "I've got it all under control." Sometimes the bravest thing is simply, "I can't do this alone."